All right, hi everybody, I'm Nolan. Hoffman, thanks for joining us for East Texas in Focus tonight. Let's get started. Congress will soon wrap up their summer break and return to D.C. Once they're back at the Capitol, a looming government funding deadline will be top of mind, along with unfinished business left pending before the break. To help us understand what's happening at our nation's Capitol tonight, we are getting an update from our representative there in D.C., East Texas Congressman Nathaniel Moran. We had the opportunity to ask Representative Moran about domestic issues like the effects of escalating tariffs and the demand of the release of the Epstein Files. We also talked to him about the issues that are dominating global headlines like the war in Gaza or the ongoing talks to put an end to the war in Ukraine and Russia. We start with what's worrying people here at home. During the summer recess, Congressman Moran tells us he has traveled across the district he represents to hear what is top of mind for many East Texans, the number one issue being the economy. According to the latest report from the U.S. Department of Labor, lower prices for gas and food kept inflation steady last month, but the cost of housing was significantly higher in July than it was last year. Our Washington correspondent Piney Woods explains the newest numbers right now.
Economic indicators show that we are moving in the right direction.
The White House says it's a good economic report. Inflation in July was lower than most economists expected. Prices rose 2.7% over the year before.
It's better than expected, but in my opinion, it's still a little hot. Anytime we're above that 2% inflation number, we're in the wrong spot.
Thomas Aiello with the National Taxpayers Union says economists want to keep inflation below 2%. Driving the higher costs, housing. The Consumer Price Index shows Americans paid 3.7% more for housing in July over last year. And as Americans pay more for tariffs, the Labor Department says furniture prices are up 3.4%. And coffee, most of it is imported, is now about $2.10 more expensive per pound than it was last year, according to the Federal Reserve.
The full tariff picture remains to be seen.
Those inflation numbers reflect July, before most of President Donald Trump's broad reciprocal tariffs took effect. It was last Thursday. President Trump says the tariffs will restore wealth to the United States.
And that's what he's focused on doing, while simultaneously driving down costs.
All right, again, that was Vinay Simlot reporting right there. Economists are also watching the Federal Reserve closely as inflation numbers are lower than expected. Fed officials have also raised concerns about the job market, suggesting the Federal Reserve may lower interest rates in September. Meanwhile, mortgage rates are at their lowest levels in 10 months. The average rate on a 30-year U.S. mortgage fell this week to 6.58% from 6.63% last week. That's according to mortgage buyer Freddie Mac. However, rates are still above the 6.49% seen a year ago. Elevated mortgage rates have helped keep the U.S. housing market in a sales slump since early 2022, and home sales sank last year to their lowest level in nearly 30 years. Mortgage rates are influenced by several factors, from the Federal Reserve's interest rate policy decisions to bond market investors' expectations for the economy and inflation. But what does this all mean to you right now, and what is being done about it currently in Washington, D.C. there? Congressman Moran answers our questions. All right, Representative Moran, thanks for coming on, and we appreciate it.
Nolan, my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
They're in effect for many countries right now. What do you make of the tariffs? Are they good for America?
I've said for a long time now that long term, the tariffs are really a tax on the consumers. That's an economic, political, economic point that I think is pretty clear in my mind. Short term as a negotiation strategy, I don't mind that the president's doing that. In fact, you've seen great success. You've seen Europe come to the table and renegotiate and get back to a level playing field, more level playing field. We've got a framework now that we might work around and get a true final agreement on. And Europe, for a number of years, has been using non-tariff trade barriers to keep our products out of Europe, and it's been shameful to see that happen. So the president's strength in this negotiation is very helpful. Now, it's caused a little short-term tumult, no question about that, and there's hesitation by businesses to engage and release their capital. But by the time you get to 2026, I think what you're going to see is a clear pathway forward, because we've got Indonesia coming to the table, we've got India, we've got Europe, we've got China coming come to the table. Taiwan, Japan, you name the countries out there that are critically important to trade with the United States, they recognize that they have not treated us in a reciprocal manner for decades now. And as a result of that, and as a result of President Trump's strength in this negotiating time frame, we're going to have a more reciprocal, more fair trade and tariff policy moving forward. Ultimately, long term, I hope we see that the tariffs in general stay low, because that lower tariff would mean lower prices for consumers. As it relates to China, though, certainly when you're dealing with a bad actor, you're going to have to use those tariffs as an economic incentive for businesses to get out of China, decouple from China, and to punish China for its continued bad acts.
Yeah, speaking of China, what do you make of the pause when it comes with the China tariff hike for another 90 days? Was that necessary for negotiating tactics?
I think it was. I think they must be making some progress. I'm not involved in those talks in the administration side, but I give the president leeway in this regard, because we've seen success. The amount of success that he's had in the last 8 months, in the first 8 months of his second term as a president, is immense. It's incredible. And so we need to give him latitude to be able to continue to have those negotiating talks with China. If he sees fit that another 90 days or 30 days or 60 days is appropriate, he and Ambassador Greer, who's our U.S. trade representative, I trust them to do the right thing by us. We'll see where it turns out in 90 days, whether or not China is willing to actually come in good faith and give us the things that we need to happen and put measures of accountability in place, because China, like Russia, is an entity that considers us an adversary, and they cannot be trusted. Their strategic interests are not aligned with our strategic interests.
What would be your message to East Texas businesses who might be worried about the impact of tariffs right now?
Yeah, my message has been consistent for the past several months, and we're spending a lot of time in August talking to those businesses, saying, look, 2025 is going to have a little bit of tumultuousness to it, because we're in this period of uncertainty. We're trying to reset the stage, but 2026 is going to be a banner year. Now that we've passed the one big beautiful bill, we've reduced taxes for families, for farmers, for businesses. We've given businesses certainty as to the tax provisions going forward. We've made permanent some of those very, very critical portions of the tax code that are important to economic growth. Section 199A for small businesses and for pass-through entities. We've made permanent the 179, Section 179, and for the qualified business income deduction for businesses, and for capital expenditures, and for Made in America provisions, and for R&D expensing. Those were the critical aspects of the bill that are going to give economic growth to businesses next year. And by the time this 2025 gets done, I think we're going to see the tariff issue settled. There's going to be lots of certainty on the international stage. We're going to have great tax certainty on the domestic stage. You're going to see economic growth in 2026.
You were there when President Trump visited the Texas Hill Country not too long ago. Especially, I was watching the press conference. What did you see, first of all, when you got there with all the devastation?
Yeah, it was the emotional toll on Central Texas is going to be a toll that stands for a lifetime. It was devastating to hear the stories from Camp Mystic and those that were involved in the actual events that week, and then the rescue and recovery that occurred afterwards. I was so proud of so many East Texans that went down there and participated in that. We had a number of people from Longview and the Longview Fire Department that went down as part of the Swiftwater Rescue Unit that was so critical in the days, the hours and the days and the weeks afterwards. And what they had to experience in that rescue and recovery period was devastating for them emotionally too. And so we want to stand with those families and stand with that community. We want to be good neighbors. That's what we do in Texas. And I was proud that so many in East Texas decided to go down there. I was with the crisis response team here in East Texas just this last week, and we provided dinner to them and said thank you because we saw the impact they were having, supporting emotionally and spiritually the first responders that were down there, and their critical part playing throughout that time frame. But that's what East Texans are good at. We're good at serving others and loving others, and some great examples beyond those two that I just gave, but so proud of the people that went down there and helped out.
What's it going to take for the region to rebuild?
Well, it's going to take a lot of concerted effort, not just on the city and the county and the regional level, but at the state level. They've got some decisions to make, and that's part of some of the important things that need to happen during this special session, this special legislative session.
I want to switch over to, I'm sure you know, you're obviously there in D.C., the Epstein File controversy that was, I think, about a couple weeks ago. It was more than a couple weeks ago, but that was pretty much everything they were talking about there in D.C. If the so-called Epstein Files do exist, or things that haven't been released to the public that might be significant, does the public, in your opinion, deserve to see all of that?
Absolutely. I've called for the full release of the Epstein Files. I think transparency is critical to restoring trust and accountability, and not just the federal government, but any level of government. That's how we behaved ourselves here at the county level when I was here, and at the city level, and I expect the same at the federal level. So I've called for the release of those files. I think there certainly should be measures taken so that victims that are identified in those documents, that if they don't want to be identified, that they can have their names and that information redacted, so that there's not additional trauma put on those victims. But beyond that, frankly, I think there needs to be a full release of those files. When
you lawmakers go back to D.C. Coming up in September, I believe, what's going to happen with this?
Well, I think it's going to come to the House floor for a vote. We've got a couple of petitions, discharge petition that's made its way up, that's ripe for a vote. And so if there's not at least an accommodation or a release of the files to the extent that those people pushing the discharge petition are satisfied, it's going to come to a vote. We've got some other measures that may see committee hearing, but I think ultimately there's going to be a vote in Congress at some point. There's too many of us up there that say, look, we've been calling for the release of these files. We've got to be consistent. We've called for the release of the files during the Biden administration. I think we've got to be consistent and call for the release of the files also during the Trump administration. You cannot reverse your position simply because of your political affiliation. You got to be consistent in the positions you take.
That's a good start tonight. When we come back with East Texas in Focus, we hear more from Congressman Moran on the impact of global issues here at home, and of course more in depth with our topic. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. A number of conflicts on the global stage continue to claim innocent lives. The United States is currently part of ongoing talks around the world to stop the fighting in these areas. During our conversation with Representative Nathaniel Moran, he told us about the high stakes in the Middle East and the Ukraine and Russia conflict. Here's what he had to say. I want to start with the big news, President Trump meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska. What do you hope comes out of that meeting?
Well, I hope and expect that President Trump is going to continue to exert more strength on behalf of America to get us to a place of peace in Europe. That's what he's brought to the Oval Office. That's what's been missing for the past 4 years, is strength. America's strength on the world stage is critical to our, not just the security and peace in Europe, but the security and peace here in the United States.
Besides these talks in Alaska, what more do you think it's going to take for Putin to get a ceasefire and end that war?
Well, what we have to remember is we cannot trust Vladimir Putin. He's a tyrant with expansionist intent. That's what he's always wanted. He wants to restore the greatness in his mind of the former Soviet Union, and that means land grabs. He's going to continue to push until a superpower like the United States pushes back and says, we're not going to stand for it. So I appreciate the fact that President Trump is going to sit down with him face to face, because I think that's going to help to communicate how serious President Trump is about achieving peace in the region there in Europe, and how Putin needs to back off of what he's doing presently, and to put a pause on all that he intends to do even in the future, because frankly I don't think he intended to stop with Ukraine.
And then switching over to another war, the Israel-Hamas war going on there in the Middle East. I know it's a complicated issue. It seems like it's been for years on end, but what do you think with that it's going to take from the president to make the fighting stop there?
Yeah, the president's already done a great job in the first 8 months of restoring a whole lot more ability to achieve peace in the Middle East through, again, asserting strength on the world stage and standing with our ally Israel. You know, these attacks, these strategic attacks that we made on Iranian nuclear sites were critical. For years, people have been saying, look, they're getting too close to a nuclear bomb. That would have been devastating, not just to Israel, but to the United States, because we know their appetite for destruction, those terrorist appetites for destruction, was not just set on Israel, but it was really the United States. That's who they wanted to get to. And so it was critical that we actually could conduct those strikes. And in doing so, we sent a message across the Middle East that we want peace. We mean business when we say, do not pursue this nuclear threat. And frankly, we need to continue to stand with our ally in Israel. I was there last week and got a chance to sit down with Speaker Johnson, along with 3 other members of Congress, with Prime Minister Netanyahu. We got to see firsthand what's going on in the Golan Heights and the Gaza Strip and the Judea-Samaria area known as the West Bank. And we sat down with folks on both sides of the issue, both the Arabs and the Israelis, to talk about pathways to peace and what are obstructing those pathways to peace presently. So getting that firsthand experience really gave me the ability, I think, to come back and firmly say more and more, we've got to stand with Israel. We've got to eradicate the Hamas terrorists, the Hezbollah terrorists, the Houthi terrorists that don't desire peace for any peoples in the region, Israelis or Arabs.
In Gaza, the Gaza Health Ministry says so far 227 people have died of starvation and malnutrition in the area. Who do you think's responsible for that happening? And is there anything the United States could do or is doing to help that situation?
Yeah, the primary entity responsible for the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is Hamas. They're the ones that could walk away from this war tomorrow. They could hand over the hostages and it could all be over and peace and stability could start to be ushered back into that region, but they don't want to do that. So Hamas is the entity at fault. Now, the problems with getting more humanitarian aid into Gaza right now, I lay that also at the feet of the United Nations and Hamas, because the United Nations is not allowing for security forces to accompany those food drops and those medical drops the way they need to. They are not vetting the people that are involved inside in the medical communities, and as a result of that, Hamas is exerting more influence. Hamas is taking this food and then weaponizing it against its people. They're making sure that only certain select people get that food, and then they're using that food to sell, to finance their own terrorist organizations, to prop up the very terrorist organization that we want to get rid of. Until the United Nations gets out of the way and allows other entities in there to actually do this correctly, we're going to see this humanitarian crisis continue to grow. Israel wants it solved. They know it's a problem from a humanitarian standpoint. They know that the world is watching. They're trying to do what's right. We met with the commander of the IDF that is in charge of that humanitarian aid going into the Gaza border. I stood there, looked at the Gaza border, and heard the reports of the amounts of food that's sitting on the border waiting to go in, but cannot go in, frankly, because the United Nations and its associated affiliates are standing in the way of the true processes that need to happen for the people to receive the aid they need.
Switching over to immigration right now, of course, President Donald Trump ran on that majorly. It seems like he's been very successful at the southern border, cracking down at the southern border. What's been the main point of success for that from the president and his team?
Yeah, it's strength. It's a matter of just the executive of our United States doing what he is empowered to do, and that is to secure our sovereign borders and to make sure that our borders remain secure and sovereign. And under President Biden, we called several times for him to exercise executive authority to do just that, but instead of doing that, he went the opposite way. Now, as part of a member of Congress last session, in the 118th, we passed H.R. 2, which was the toughest border security bill that's ever been passed through Congress. It got stuck in the Senate and didn't get signed by the president. But in doing so, we put a firm foot in the ground and said, these are the measures that we need to see happen statutorily. And by the way, Mr. President, we were talking to President Biden at the time, he had the authority to do a lot of that as the executive under the current statutes, but he wouldn't do it, the statutes, but he wouldn't do that. Now, President Trump came in and immediately said, I'm going to take a firm stance on what's happening on the border. And immediately people said, oh, we respect that. You mean you're going to let us actually engage in law enforcement on the border? Yes, we're going to let you do that. And they were glad about that. And the people that were coming up from South and Central America said, you know what, I think I'm going to think twice before I cross that border.
All right, when we return tonight, Representative Moran has spent weeks traveling across East Texas to hear from you. After the break, he shares what he's heard so far. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. right, welcome back tonight. During the current summer break from legislature work in Washington, D.C., there, Congressman Nathaniel Moran has visited and heard from people living across the East Texas area. Moran tells us by listening to what worries you, he's able to make better informed decisions at our nation's capital. Listen to what he had to tell me. I want to get to what you're currently hearing from East Texans right now. You've spent a lot of time over the summer talking with people, I'm guessing, across the area here. What are their main concerns right now, or just what they want to see from you over the coming months?
Well, they're so proud and happy that we have passed the One Big Beautiful Bill. I'll start there. That's the number one comment that I've gotten, is that reconciliation package, which prevented the largest tax hike in American history from going into effect next year, is going to be very critical to hardworking families that whether or not you're getting overtime, or you're a senior that needs an extra deduction above the standard deduction, or if you're working for tips, or if you're just a hardworking family that now is not going to see on average maybe a $1,200 or $1,300 increase in taxation next year, but instead you're going to see a decrease of your tax bill of about $500 or $600. That's what the average American and average East Texan is going to see next year as a result of that. Those are on the personal sides, and we already talked about the business sides. People understand what a massive amount of work it took to get that bill passed. 11 different committees. Most of the time in reconciliation process, one, maybe two committees is involved. 11 different committees was involved in this process. Came out with a great product. It's not perfect. There's some things about it I don't like. But the second thing people are talking to me about is what you started with earlier, and that was tariff and trade issues. I mean, there is a concern, there's an uncertainty about supply chain and about cost of goods sold and cost of services provided. No question about that. And we are seeing some impact on that. And I'm hearing that we need to get that settled as quickly as possible. And I want to reaffirm, I think the president's intent is to get that settled. His goal is reciprocity in the tariff and trade area and fairness in the trade and tariff area. And I think once we see that, then we'll see those tariffs come down. And that's my hope. Long term, I want the tariffs to be as low as possible with those countries that are free and fair with us, and that are reciprocal in how they treat us. But those two things in particular are the loudest points of echo that I hear here in East Texas. And it's a great reaffirmation that we are on the right track, that we're doing the right things, because ultimately those issues are about issues of liberty, particularly tax. The lower the tax burden that people have, the greater their liberty is. And my goal in Congress is to provide as much liberty to our individuals, our families, our farmers, and our businesses as possible here in East Texas.
Representative Moran, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thanks so much. All right, coming up after the break, closing words. We will be right back tonight. All right, welcome back. When federal lawmakers return to Washington, D.C. in just a few weeks, their to-do list will be long, from helping solve some of the world's toughest conflicts to making sure that your life and my life is better every day here at home. They have some tough work cut out ahead for them. Regardless of what happens, they are here to serve the people who vote for them. And remember, you can always reach out to their office to ask for help or to let your voice be heard. Next week, of course, we'll zero in on much more issues right here in East Texas. That is all happening this coming Saturday on East Texas in Focus. Have a great night, everybody.